The room was dead silent. 11 bishops sat frozen in their chairs, and across the long marble table, Pope Leo XIV opened a red folder, placed it in front of them, and said 5 words that would shake the Catholic Church to its core. "You have 72 hours. No one moved. No one breathed, because every man in that room knew this was not a negotiation. It was June 14, 2026. And what happened inside that meeting room in the Apostolic Palace was never supposed to reach the public, but it did, and when the world found out what Pope Leo XIV told those bishops, and what he threatened to do if they refused, the reaction was immediate. Some called him the bravest pope in modern history, others said he had gone too far, but one thing was clear: this pope was not bluffing, and the men who defied him were about to learn that the hard way. But what exactly did those bishops do? What pushed Leo to the edge, and what was the punishment he had waiting for them? To understand what happened in that room on June 14th, you have to go back exactly 9 days. It started with a letter, not just any letter, a formal directive sent from the Vatican's dicastery for bishops to every episcopal conference in the world. The document was 11 pages long. It carried the personal signature of Pope Leo XIV, and its contents were explosive. The directive was clear: every diocese on the planet was required to submit a full transparency report within 60 days. Financial records going back 10 years, property holdings, investment portfolios, abuse complaint logs, clergy reassignment histories, internal disciplinary records, every file, every transfer, every decision that had been buried in filing cabinets and locked offices for decades. This was not a suggestion, it was an order. Pope Leo had been pushing accountability since the day he took office. After Pope Francis passed away on April 21, 2025, and Leo was elected on May 8 of that year, he made one thing absolutely clear from his very first address: the era of silence inside the Catholic Church was over. He stood on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica that day and said it plainly: this church will not hide anymore. 7 words, no decoration, no diplomacy, just a promise. And for more than a year, he kept that promise. He restructured the Vatican's financial oversight. He installed independent auditors in 3 major dioceses. He personally intervened in abuse cases that had been stalled for years. He wasn't just talking about reform, he was doing it methodically, relentlessly, without asking permission. But not everyone wanted the curtains pulled back.
Not everyone wanted the light to reach those dark corners. And 11 bishops across 3 continents, men with power, influence, and deep roots inside the institution, decided they would not comply with the directive.
They didn't just ignore it, they organized against it. Before we continue with the story, if you enjoy stories like this, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it means more than you know. Within 48 hours of the directive's release, a private message chain was circulating among the 11 bishops. It was encrypted, hosted on a secure platform, carefully worded, and its message was simple: resist. The group was led by 3 central figures. The first was Archbishop Gerhard Cardinal of Munich, a towering figure in the German Catholic landscape. 71 years old, conservative to his core, a man who had survived 3 papal administrations without ever being questioned, challenged, or disciplined. He viewed the transparency directive as a personal insult, an intrusion into the sovereignty of his archdiocese. He had run Munich his way for 18 years, and he had no intention of handing over his records to Rome. The second was Bishop Cardinal Castillo of Lima, a political operator of the highest order, known across South America for his vast network of influence, connections to politicians, media figures, and wealthy Catholic donors. He had spent 20 years building a system of loyalty, favors, and mutual protection. A transparency report wouldn't just expose his finances, it would dismantle his entire power structure. The third was Bishop Patrick Mulgrew of Philadelphia. American, sharp-tongued, media-savvy, he had appeared on cable news just 3 weeks before the directive was sent, calling Pope Leo's agenda a reckless dismantling of church tradition dressed up as progress. He was loud, he was unapologetic, and he had a following, not just among conservative Catholics, but among politicians who saw the church's internal struggle as a useful culture war talking point. Together these 3 rallied 8 more bishops from across the world: Nigeria, India, Italy, Poland, Central Africa, 11 in total. 11 men who believed they could stall the Pope's most ambitious reform effort and get away with it. But what none of them anticipated was how quickly Leo would move. On June 10th, just 5 days after the directive was sent, the Vatican received official confirmation that 11 dioceses had formally declined to comply. Not delayed, not requested extensions, declined in writing. Each letter was polite, respectful in tone, diplomatic in language, but their meaning was unmistakable. These bishops were drawing a line, and they expected the Pope to blink. When the reports reached Leo's desk that evening, his reaction surprised everyone around him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He didn't call an emergency press conference. He didn't even mention it during his morning briefing with the Secretary of State the following day. Instead, he did something far more calculated, far more dangerous. He picked up the phone and called Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, the prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, the Vatican's chief enforcer of doctrinal and canonical discipline. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, Fernandez immediately summoned his legal team to an emergency session. What Leo had requested was unprecedented in modern church history. He wanted a full canonical review of all 11 bishops, not in months, not in weeks, but within 72 hours of a deadline he was about to set. He wanted every possible penalty mapped out. Suspension from ministry, removal from office, formal investigation, apostolic administration of their dioceses, everything on the table, no exceptions. This was not a pope asking for options. This was a pope preparing for war. Words spread through the Vatican hallways like smoke through a building. By June 11th, senior cardinals across Europe were making frantic phone calls. Some were calling the 11 bishops directly, begging them to back down. One cardinal, a close friend of Archbishop Leo, reportedly told him in a phone call that lasted over an hour, "You don't understand what he's preparing, Gerhard. This is not a bluff. He has the legal framework, he has the support, and he has the will. You need to step back." But Leo didn't flinch. His response was immediate and defiant. "The Pope can send all the letters he wants. We answer to our dioceses. We answer to tradition. We do not answer to a bureaucratic checklist designed to humiliate us." That quote leaked to an Italian journalist within hours and detonated like a bomb across European media. Headlines exploded. Bishops rebel against Pope Leo. Transparency war inside the Vatican. Leo XIV faces his biggest internal challenge yet. 11 bishops say no to the Pope. The coverage was relentless. Every network, every newspaper, every Catholic blog and podcast, the church was splitting in real time, and the whole world was watching. Pope Leo said nothing publicly. He attended his scheduled meetings. He held his Wednesday general audience in St. Peter's Square. He greeted pilgrims, blessed children, smiled for photographs, waved from the Pope immobile. But behind the ancient walls of the Apostolic Palace, something very different was happening. On the evening of June 12th, Leo held a closed-door meeting with 6 of his most trusted advisors, 3 cardinals and 3 senior Vatican officials. No phones were allowed inside the room. No recording devices, no written notes. The meeting lasted 3.5 hours. When it ended, one of the attendees later described it to a trusted colleague with a single sentence: "The Pope has made up his mind and God help them." What Leo decided in that meeting was this: he would not issue a public statement, he would not engage in a media battle, he would not give interviews, he would not explain himself. Instead, he would summon all 11 bishops to Rome in person, face to face, no intermediaries, no lawyers, no staff. The invitations went out within hours. Not through email, not through phone calls, but through the apostolic nunciature in each country.
The Vatican's official diplomatic channel, the most formal, most serious method of communication the Holy See possesses. Each invitation was identical. It stated that the Holy Father requested the bishop's personal presence at the Apostolic Palace on June 14th at 9 o'clock in the morning. Attendance was described as an expression of communion with the successor of Peter.
Vatican language for "you do not have a choice." The subject line listed a single phrase: compliance review. Now here is where things got truly intense. The moment those invitations landed, the 11 bishops were thrown into chaos. For all their bravado, none of them had actually expected to be called to Rome. They expected pushback. They expected negotiations, maybe a strongly worded letter, but a summons to the Apostolic Palace from the Pope himself. This was different. 3 of the bishops, Renner, Castillo, and Mulgrew, immediately convened a video call. The conversation lasted 2 hours and became heated almost instantly. Mulgrew argued that refusing the summons would be catastrophic. It would give the Pope legal and canonical justification to escalate without further dialogue. Renard disagreed sharply. "He won't actually do anything," Renard insisted. "He needs us more than we need him. Without the bishops, he has no church." It was Castillo who settled the debate. His voice was calm but firm. "We go," he said. "We go together, all 11. We show him we are united. We show him we are not afraid. And we tell him to his face that comply." So they went, all 11 of them from 4 continents. They booked flights within hours. They arrived in Rome on the morning of June 14th. They were collected from their hotels by Vatican cars, black sedans with tinted windows. They were driven through the gates of the Apostolic Palace without stopping. No press, no cameras, no witnesses. They were escorted through corridors most of them had never walked before, deep into a section of the palace used for private diplomatic functions.
A room with a long marble table, 12 chairs on one side, one on the other. The walls were lined with Renaissance paintings, apostles, saints, and martyrs gazing down with expressions that felt uncomfortably knowing. They sat. They waited. The door was closed behind them. 12 minutes passed. Then the door opened and Pope Leo XIV walked in alone. No cardinal at his side, no secretary, no aide.
Just the Pope in his white cassock, a red folder under his left arm, and that calm, measured expression the world had come to know. The expression that revealed nothing and concealed everything. Who sat down, placed the folder on the table, folded his hands, and looked at each of them one by one, moving slowly from face to face. No one spoke. What happened next lasted approximately 90 minutes. And according to 3 separate sources who were present in that room, sources who later shared details with trusted journalists under strict conditions of anonymity, it was the most intense confrontation inside the Vatican in living memory. The Pope began by thanking them for coming. His tone was warm, almost paternal. He acknowledged their years of service. He noted by name specific achievements each bishop had made in their diocese. Schools built, communities served, crises managed. It was personal, detailed, the kind of recognition that showed he had studied each of them carefully. Several of the bishops later admitted they were completely disarmed. They had come expecting confrontation. What they got first was affirmation. But then Leo's tone shifted, not dramatically, not with anger, just a change in pressure, like the air before a storm drops by a single degree. "I did not call you here to celebrate your work," he said. "I called you here because each of you chose to defy a direct instruction from the Holy See, and I want to understand, face to face, man to man, why." The room went cold. Archbishop Renaud was the first to speak. He had prepared his argument carefully. He argued that the transparency directive was too broad, too invasive, and fundamentally incompatible with the internal governance of individual dioceses. He cited canon law. He referenced historical precedent. He warned that opening financial and disciplinary records to outside review would expose the church to lawsuits, media manipulation, and political exploitation. It was a polished performance, every sentence rehearsed, every objection anticipated. Leo listened without interrupting. When Renaud finished, the Pope nodded once slowly, giving nothing away. Then Bishop Mulgrew spoke. Where Renaud had been strategic, Mulgrew was aggressive. He accused the Vatican of bureaucratic overreach. He called the directive ideologically driven. He claimed it was part of a progressive agenda designed to weaken traditional church governance and centralize power in Rome. "The faithful don't want transparency reports," Mulgrew declared, his voice rising. "They want faith, they want tradition, they want stability, they want a church that doesn't change every time the wind blows." Several bishops nodded. One murmured in agreement. Leo remained perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, his expression unchanged. Then Castillo spoke. His argument was different from the others, more personal, more emotional. He warned the Pope that forcing compliance would fracture the church in Latin America, that bishops would be seen as puppets of Rome, that local communities he had served for decades, would lose faith not in their bishops but in the papacy itself. "You are asking us to betray our people's trust," Castillo said quietly, "and that is something I cannot do." When all three had finished, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to the man sitting alone on the other side of the table. Pope Leo XIV took a single breath. Then he spoke slowly, deliberately, each word landing like a hammer on stone. "You say this directive threatens the church," he began. "So let me tell you what actually threatens the church. Silence threatens the church. Hiding records threatens the church. Moving priests from parish to parish without consequence, without accountability, without a single note in any file, that threatens the church, not transparency. Transparency saves the church." He paused. He let the words settle. Then he opened the red folder. Inside were printed documents, pages of data, names, dates, locations. He slid one copy across the table toward the bishops. "This," he said, "is a summary of abuse complaints filed within your 11 dioceses over the past 15 years. Complaints that were received and never investigated, cases that were opened and then quietly closed, priests who were accused, transferred, and allowed to serve again in new parishes where no one knew their history." The room went pale. One bishop looked down at the table. Another closed his eyes. "I did not compile this to shame you," Leo continued. "I compiled it because someone had to. Because if we do not open these files ourselves, voluntarily, transparently, with courage, then someone else will open them for us. The courts, the press, the governments, and when they do, it will not come in the form of a transparency report. It will come as an indictment, not of individuals, but of the entire institution." No one responded. Leo let the silence stretch. 10 seconds, 20, 30, nearly a full minute of absolute quiet in a room where 11 of the most powerful men in the Catholic Church sat motionless, unable to meet the Pope's eyes. Then Leo leaned forward. "You have 72 hours, he said. 72 hours to submit full compliance with the directive. Every record, every file, every name. If you comply within that window, this conversation stays in this room. Your service will be acknowledged. Your cooperation will be recognized, and we will move forward together." He paused one final time. "If you do not comply, if even one of you refuses, I will initiate formal canonical proceedings. Your cases will be referred to the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. You will be suspended from all episcopal duties pending the outcome of the investigation. Your dioceses will be placed under temporary apostolic administration until the review is complete and the findings will be made public." The threat was staggering. Suspension, investigation, removal, public exposure. In the entire history of the modern papacy, no pope had ever confronted sitting bishops with such direct, specific, and immediate consequences. Not Pius XII, not John Paul II, not Benedict XVI, not Francis. No one. Archbishop Renner broke the silence first. His voice was tight, controlled, but underneath there was something he couldn't fully conceal, a tremor of genuine fear. "Your Holiness," he said, "you would fracture the church over a filing deadline." Leo's response came instantly, without hesitation, without raising his voice. "No, Archbishop. You would fracture the church by protecting silence over truth. I am simply ending the silence." The meeting ended moments later. The Pope stood, picked up his folder, and walked out the same door he had entered, alone, unhurried, without looking back. The bishops were escorted out through a private corridor. No press, no cameras, no statements. Several of them were visibly shaken. One reportedly sat in the Vatican car for several minutes before speaking. What happened over the next 48 hours was nothing short of a political earthquake inside the Catholic Church. By the evening of June 14th, just hours after the meeting, the first cracks appeared. 2 bishops from the group, one from Nigeria, one from India, contacted the Vatican independently and submitted their compliance reports. Full transparency, complete files, no conditions attached, no statements issued. They simply complied. The dominoes had begun to fall. The next morning, June 15th, 3 more bishops broke ranks. 2 from Italy and 1 from Poland submitted their records electronically before noon. One of them reportedly told a Vatican official during the transmission, "I have a diocese to protect and a conscience to answer to. I cannot afford a war with this pope." 5 down, 6 remaining, and the 6 still holding out were led by the original 3, Renner, Castillo, and Mulgrew. They held an emergency video call on the night of June 15th. The conversation was tense, chaotic, and deeply divided. Renner wanted to hold the line at all costs. Mulgrew supported him, but was noticeably less certain than before. And Castillo, the man who had argued so passionately in the meeting room, was wavering. He had received calls that afternoon from 3 influential South American cardinals. Each had delivered the same message. "Step back. The tide has turned, Thomas," one told him. "The Pope is not retreating. He will follow through. Do not be the last man standing when the hammer falls." Castillo didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel room in Rome, staring out the window at the dome of St. Peter's glowing against the dark sky. He replayed the Pope's words. He replayed the look in Leo's eyes when he slid that red folder across the table. And for the first time since this crisis began, Thomas Castillo wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. By June 16th, the second day of the deadline, the pressure had become unbearable. The story had leaked completely. Every major news outlet on Earth was the standoff. Journalists had established a permanent presence outside the Vatican walls. Commentators and analysts filled hours of airtime debating whether Pope Leo had overplayed his hand or whether this was the most courageous act of papal leadership in modern history. Inside the Vatican, Leo remained calm, almost eerily calm. He received updates every 90 minutes from the Secretary of State. He reviewed the canonical proceedings with Cardinal Fernandez twice that day. Every document was prepared. Every order was drafted. Every contingency was accounted for. The machinery of accountability was loaded and ready. All that remained was the deadline. On the afternoon of June 16th, something extraordinary happened. Pope Leo had traveled briefly to Castel Gandolfo, the papal retreat outside Rome. As he stepped outside the residence for a short walk, a small group of journalists who had been waiting at the perimeter shouted questions. One of them asked about the standoff. Leo stopped walking, turned toward the press, and delivered a statement that landed like thunder across the entire Catholic world. "Division among Christians is always painful," he said, "but when men refuse to accept accountability, when they choose institutional comfort over truth, the Church must move forward with or without them. That is not cruelty, that is leadership." It was not a press conference, it was not planned. It was 7 sentences spoken on a gravel path outside a papal villa, and it changed everything. That night, 2 more bishops submitted their compliance, one from the remaining Italian holdout, one from Poland. They did it quietly, without public statements, without explanations or justifications. 3 remained, Renner, Castillo, and Mulgrew, and the clock was running out. The morning of June 17th arrived, the final day, the last hours of the 72-hour deadline. At 7:15 in the morning, the Central African bishop, the quietest member of the group, a man who had barely spoken throughout the entire crisis, sent his complete files directly to the dicastery for bishops. He included a handwritten note on Vatican stationery. "I submit in obedience to the Holy Father and in service to the truth. May God guide us all through what lies ahead." 2 remained. At 9:45, Castillo broke. He called the Apostolic Nuncio in Lima and dictated his compliance statement over the phone. His voice was steady, but strained. He submitted his diocesan files electronically within the hour. He issued no public comment. He gave no interviews. He simply complied. When Archbishop Renner learned that Castillo had surrendered, he was furious. He called Mulgrew immediately. His voice was raw. "We are the last 2, he said. "If we fold now, everything we stood for means nothing. We have to hold." Mulgrew hesitated. For the first time in weeks, the first time in the entire crisis, the sharp-tongued bishop from Philadelphia had no argument to make, no talking point, no clever response for the cameras. He asked Renner for 1 hour to think. That hour changed everything. During those 60 minutes, Mulgrew received a phone call from a retired American cardinal, a man he had known for 30 years and respected deeply. The cardinal spoke for 12 uninterrupted minutes. He told Mulgrew about a private conversation he'd had with Pope Leo several months earlier, an off-the-record meeting, no aides, no agenda. In that conversation, Leo had laid out his vision with absolute clarity. "Every day I sit in this office," Leo had told the cardinal, "I carry the weight of every victim who was silenced, every file that was buried, every priest who was protected when a child was not. If I do nothing, if I let the system continue, then I am as guilty as the men who built it. I would rather lose every bishop in this church than allow one more child to be harmed by our silence." The cardinal repeated those words to Mulgrew. Then he added his own. Patrick, I've known you for 30 years and I'm telling you this man is not your enemy. He is the best chance this church has. Don't be the reason he fails. Mulgrew hung up the other phone. He sat alone in his office for 20 minutes. He stared at the crucifix on his wall. He thought about his diocese, his parishioners, his legacy. Then he picked up to the phone, called the Vatican switchboard, asked to be connected to the dicastery for bishops, and submitted his full compliance. Renner was the last man standing. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on June 17th, with just hours left before the deadline expired, the Vatican had received compliance from 10 of the 11 bishops. Only Archbishop Gerhard Renner of Munich remained defiant. Pope Leo was informed immediately. He was sitting in his private study at the time. He asked one question: has he been given every opportunity to comply? The answer was yes. Multiple calls, multiple messages, multiple channels. Every door had been opened. Leo nodded slowly, then he said 3 words: prepare the proceedings. At 4:30 that afternoon, the Diocese for the Doctrine of the Faith formally opened a canonical review of Archbishop Gerhard Renner. The notification was transmitted simultaneously to Renner's office in Munich, to the German Bishops' Conference, and to the Apostolic Nunciature in Berlin. The review would examine 3 areas: Renner's formal refusal to comply with a direct papal directive, a comprehensive independent audit of his archdiocese's financial records, and an investigation into any previously unreported complaints or disciplinary matters within his jurisdiction. The announcement was public, deliberate, and unmistakable. Renner released a statement within the hour. It was short, 3 paragraphs, defiant in tone, but thinner in conviction than anything he had said before. He called the proceedings an unprecedented attack on the legitimate authority of dioceses and bishops, and vowed to contest them through every available canonical channel. But the bravado was hollow now, and everyone could hear it, because Renner knew, as every canon lawyer, every cardinal, every bishop on the planet knew, that once the Vatican formally opens proceedings against a bishop at the Pope's personal direction, the trajectory is clear. The review will be thorough, the findings will be published, and the consequences will follow. By the evening of June 17th, the story had consumed every corner of the Catholic world and far beyond. Every major newspaper, every broadcast network, every social media platform.
The standoff between Pope Leo XIV and his own bishops was the biggest story in global religion and one of the biggest stories of the period. Inside the Vatican that night, Pope Leo held a brief meeting with his senior staff. He thanked them for their discipline, for their discretion, for their courage in what he acknowledged had been an extraordinarily difficult week.
And then he said something that several people in that room later described as the most honest, most human, and most revealing statement of the entire crisis. I did not become Pope to be loved by everyone, he said quietly. I became Pope to lead. And sometimes leadership means being the only person standing in a room full of people who want you to sit down. I would rather stand alone and do what is right than sit comfortably and do nothing. The room was silent. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. The morning, June 18th, Pope Leo appeared at his weekly general audience in St. Peter's Square. The crowd was the largest in months. People had come from across Italy, across Europe, from as far as the United States and Brazil. Not just for the audience, but to see the man who had just stared down 11 bishops in one. Leo spoke about his recent apostolic journey to Spain, about the warmth and faith of the Spanish people, about the beauty of Barcelona, the devotion at the Abbey of Montserrat, the hope he witnessed in the Canary Islands. He did not mention the standoff. He did not mention the bishops. He did not reference the deadline, the red folder, or the proceedings against Renner. He didn't have to. The whole world already knew. But near the end of his address, Leo paused. He looked out at the enormous crowd filling the square, and he said something that many interpreted as a quiet, definitive statement on everything that had just transpired. The church does not grow stronger by holding on to its secrets, he said. It grows stronger by opening its doors, even when what lies behind them is painful. Especially then. The square erupted in applause. In the days that followed, the aftershocks continued. Renner's canonical review moved forward with unusual speed. Several of the bishops who had complied began voluntarily publishing their transparency reports, not because they were required to make them public, but because they wanted to be seen on the right side of a historic moment. Catholic communities around the world debated the Pope's actions. Some criticized his methods as heavy-handed, others praised his moral clarity. But even his harshest critics acknowledged one undeniable truth. Pope Leo XIV had done what no modern pope had dared to do. He drew a line. He set a deadline, he named the consequences, and he followed through. The era of comfortable silence inside the Catholic Church is over. The era of accountability has begun, and for every bishop, every cardinal, every institutional leader who believed they could outlast the reforms, who believed the Pope would eventually back down, Leo XIV just proved them wrong. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten through the press, he didn't play to the cameras or issue dramatic declarations. He simply opened a red folder, looked 11 men in the eyes, and gave them 72 hours to decide what kind of leaders they truly were. For 10 of them, that was enough. If this story moved you, if you believe accountability matters, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell and share this video with someone who needs to hear it.
Every click, every comment, every share helps us bring you stories the world needs to see.